Rain drummed against the
Why
windshield in
you
sheets so thick the world beyond dissolved into
really?
liquid shadow. Bruno Hayes sat rigid behind the wheel of his black sedan, one hand loose on the leather, the other pressed flat against his thigh, as though anchoring himself to something solid. The traffic light ahead burned red through the downpour, a smudge of color in the gray. He should have been thinking about the quarterly review tomorrow morning, the merger talks with the Singapore firm, the presentation slides his assistant had sent over an hour ago that he hadn't opened. Instead, his gaze drifted sideways toward the intersection, toward the huddled shape on the corner, where the awning of a closed pawn shop offered a few feet of shelter from the deluge. A woman. She crouched, low knees drawn up, a soaked cardboard sign propped against the brick behind her. One arm extended a paper cup toward the blurred shapes of pedestrians hurrying past umbrellas bent against the wind. Nobody stopped. Nobody even slowed. The cup trembled
Why
in her grip,
you
water sloshing over the rim,
really?
a few coins visible at the bottom catching what little light the street lamp threw down. Her clothes hung shapeless and dark, with rain, hair plastered to her skull, face angled down as though she couldn't bear to meet anyone's eyes. Bruno's chest constricted. He'd seen hundreds like her over the years. Manhattan bred them in the cracks between steel and glass towers, invisible until you looked directly at them, and even then most people trained their eyes to slide past. He contributed to shelters every year, wrote checks with many zeros, attended galas where champagne flowed and everyone agreed something ought to be done. But sitting in traffic and actually seeing one up close always landed differently. The distance between his heated leather seats and that wet pavement felt obscene. The light turned green. A horn blared behind him. Bruno didn't move. His foot stayed frozen on the brake.
Why
Something about the way
you
she held herself, the angle of her
really?
shoulders, the shape of her face, even beneath the grime and exhaustion, tugged at a memory he couldn't quite surface. He leaned forward, squinting through the rain-streaked glass. The woman shifted, tucking the cup closer to her body, and for half a second, her profile caught the light. His breath stopped. Impossible. The thought landed hard and immediate, a refusal before recognition could fully form. But his body knew before his mind caught up. His hands went cold. The horn behind him sounded again, longer this time, joined by a second vehicle. Bruno threw the car into park in the middle of the intersection, hazards flashing, and shoved the door open. Rain hit him like a wall, cold and brutal, soaking through his suit jacket in seconds. He didn't feel it. He crossed the street in 4 strides, oblivious to the shouts from drivers forced to navigate around his abandoned sedan, oblivious to anything except the woman who had haunted his
Why
nightmares for
you
years. Up close, she looked
really?
worse. The bones of her face pressed sharp against skin that stretched too thin pale except for the bruised shadows under her eyes. Her hands shook violently even as she tried to still them, the cup rattling against the concrete. Dirt had worked itself into the creases of her fingers, her nails broken and rimmed with black. The cardboard sign beside her read in shaky letters, "Please help, God bless." The handwriting was familiar in a way that made his stomach twist. Iris, the name caught in his throat. He crouched slowly, bringing himself to her eye level, close enough now to see the way her shoulders tensed, her body coiling as though preparing to run despite obvious exhaustion. Rain pounded his back, plastered his hair to his forehead, dripped into his eyes. He didn't care. He was staring at his ex-wife, the woman who had walked out of his life 3 years ago, with nothing but a note and divorce papers, the mother who had abandoned their 2-year-old son without explanation or backward glance, the person he had spent 1,000 sleepless nights trying to forget. And here she was, begging on a street corner in Hell's Kitchen, barely recognizable as human. Iris. This time he said it aloud. His voice came out rough, scraped raw by shock. The woman's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide, pupils blown in terror, and for a heartbeat he saw recognition flare before being swallowed by something deeper and more primal. Fear. Pure animal fear. No, the word fell from her lips, a broken whisper, nearly lost beneath the rain. She scrambled backward, sneakers sliding on wet concrete, and knocked the cup from her own hand. Coins scattered and rolled into the gutter, spinning into storm drains. Her spine hit the brick wall. She pressed against it, as though trying to melt through solid stone, every line of her body screaming flight. No, please. Bruno held up both hands, palms out, trying to make himself smaller, less threatening. The rain slicked his skin, ran in rivulets down his wrists. His heart hammered so hard he could hear it over the storm. Every instinct screamed to reach for her, to demand answers, to shake her until she explained why she had destroyed everything. But the way she looked at him, raw terror radiating off her in waves, killed the anger before it could fully form. "It's Mickey." He kept his voice low, steady, the tone he used with Ethan during thunderstorms when his son woke screaming from nightmares. "It's Bruno. You're safe." Recognition flickered across her face again, clearer now, and with it came something worse than fear. Shame. It crashed over her features like a physical blow. Her mouth worked soundlessly, trying to form words that wouldn't come. She shook her head, short, jerky movements, and tears mixed with rainwater on her cheeks. "I'm sorry." Her voice cracked, barely audible. "I'm so sorry. I'll go. I'll just—" Her legs gave out. Bruno lunged forward and caught her before she hit the ground. She weighed almost nothing. His arms closed around a frame of bones and tremors, no substance to her, and the shock of it momentarily eclipsed every other thought. She couldn't be more than 90 pounds. The Iris he remembered had been slender but strong, a dancer's build, all controlled grace and lean muscle. This woman felt like she might shatter at a hard touch. "When did you last eat?" She didn't answer. Her eyes had gone unfocused, staring at something past his shoulder, something he couldn't see. Her breathing came quick and shallow, on the edge of hyperventilating. He touched her shoulder gently, trying to ground her, and she flinched so violently he nearly dropped her. "Iris!" He said her name again, firmer this time, trying to pull her back from wherever her mind had fled. "Look at me." She didn't. Her gaze stayed locked on the middle distance, body rigid in his arms even as she swayed. Bruno made a decision. He shifted his grip, one arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back, and lifted. She made a small sound of protest but didn't resist. Her head lolled against his chest, damp hair leaving wet streaks on his ruined shirt. He carried her back across the street. A delivery truck laid on its horn as he stepped into traffic. Bruno ignored it. His sedan still sat where he'd left it, hazards blinking, door hanging open. Rain pulled on the driver's seat. He maneuvered Iris into the passenger side, clicked her seatbelt into place with hands that had started to shake, and shut the door as gently as he could. She stared straight ahead through the windshield, expression blank, as though she wasn't entirely present inside her own skin. Bruno circled to the driver's side, slid behind the wheel on the soaked seat, and cranked the heat to maximum. Warm air blasted from the vents. He pulled back into traffic, earning another chorus of horns, and pointed the car toward the Upper West Side. Toward his estate. Toward a home Iris had never seen built with money earned after she left a life constructed deliberately in her absence. The drive took 20 minutes. Iris said nothing. She barely moved except for the constant trembling that seemed to run through her entire body, a fine vibration he could feel through the leather seats. Bruno's mind raced, cycling through 1,000 questions without answers. What was he doing? She had left him, abandoned their son, sent divorce papers through a lawyer with instructions not to contact her, then vanished so completely. Even the private investigator he'd hired found nothing. And yet seeing her like this, broken and terrified and hovering on the edge of collapse, erased every rehearsed confrontation he'd imagined over the past 3 years. The gates to his property opened automatically as he approached wrought iron, scrolling back to reveal a long driveway lined with maples. The house rose at the end, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows. Modern architecture softened by landscaping that had cost more than most people earned in a year. 10 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a guest house, infinity pool, gardens that looked professionally maintained because they were. Empty except for him, Ethan, and the nanny who came during the day. He'd bought the place 2 years ago after the second major acquisition, telling himself he wanted space for his son to grow up in. But the truth was simpler and sadder. He needed a home with no ghosts. Now he was bringing one inside. He pulled into the circular drive and killed the engine. Iris hadn't reacted to the house, hadn't shown any sign she'd even registered her surroundings. Bruno came around to her side and opened the door. She looked up at him with hollow eyes. "Your son." The words came out barely louder than breath. "Is he? He's at his grandmother's tonight." Bruno's voice came out harsher than he'd intended. Relief flooded her features, so visible and profound it made his chest ache. Inside, the foyer opened into a space of marble and light, a floating staircase curving up to the second floor, abstract art on the walls that Ethan liked to say looked like someone had sneezed paint onto canvas. Bruno led Iris past all of it to a guest suite on the first floor as far from the main living areas as the layout allowed. The room was decorated in muted grays and whites, impersonal and hotel-like, which felt appropriate. He couldn't put her in a space that felt lived in, not yet. There are clean towels in the bathroom. His words came out, clipped businessman voice, the tone he used when he needed distance. I'll bring you some clothes, and I'm calling a doctor. Iris's head whipped toward him, panic flashing across her face. Please don't. You need medical attention. This wasn't negotiable. Her condition made that clear. I'm not asking. He left before she could argue further, pulling his phone from his pocket as he climbed the stairs to his own room. His hands still shook slightly as he scrolled to Dr. Mitchell's number, the physician he kept on retainer for exactly these kinds of situations, though he'd never imagined using him for something like this. The call connected on the second ring. I need you at my house immediately. Bruno didn't bother with preamble. Mitchell knew him well enough to understand that tone meant urgency. What's the situation? Severe malnutrition, possible exposure trauma. How long will you take? 30 minutes. Make it 20. Bruno ended the call and stood in his bedroom, staring at nothing. Water dripped from his clothes onto the hardwood floor, forming a small puddle around his feet. He was still wearing his ruined suit, still soaked through, but he couldn't seem to move. The shock was finally catching up, settling over him like ice. Iris was downstairs, his ex-wife, Ethan's mother, the woman he'd convinced himself he was better off without. And she'd been living on the streets, for how long? 6 months, all 3 years. The thought made him sick. He forced himself into motion, stripping off the wet clothes and changing into dry jeans and a sweater. Then he went to the guest room down the hall where they kept overflow items, things visitors might need. He found sweatpants, an oversized t-shirt, thick socks, and brought them back downstairs. The door to Iris's suite was still closed. He knocked softly before entering. Steam drifted from the open bathroom door. He could hear the shower running, a steady hiss of water against tile. Bruno set the clothes on the bed and retreated, pulling the door shut behind him. Then he paced the hallway, back and forth 20 feet each direction, counting steps to keep his mind from spiraling. What would Dr. Mitchell say? What would he find? And what the hell was Bruno supposed to do after that? The doorbell chimed exactly 19 minutes after the call. Bruno let Mitchell in, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and the kind of calm competence that came from decades of practice. He carried a medical bag and asked no questions beyond the basics: age, symptoms, duration of condition if known. Bruno answered what he could, which wasn't much. Mitchell nodded and followed him to the guest suite. Iris had emerged from the shower. She sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a towel, wearing the clothes Bruno had provided. Her hair hung in damp, dark ropes around her face. With the grime washed away, he could see her features more clearly, could trace the familiar architecture of cheekbones and jaw beneath skin stretched too thin. She looked older, haunted, but still her. She flinched when Dr. Mitchell entered, but didn't try to run. The examination took 40 minutes. Bruno waited in the hallway again, listening to the low murmur of Mitchell's voice, asking questions, Iris's responses too soft to make out. When the door finally opened, the doctor's face was carefully neutral, which in Bruno's experience usually meant bad news delivered gently. She's severely malnourished. Mitchell kept his voice low, professional, dangerously underweight, anemic, dehydrated despite the rain. She shows signs of prolonged exposure to the elements in what appears to be extended periods of high stress. I've started her on an IV for the immediate dehydration, but she's going to need careful monitoring. Proper nutrition, reintroduced slowly. Her digestive system likely can't handle regular food quantities yet. Can she talk? Bruno heard the edge in his own voice. Physically, I mean. Yes, Mitchell paused, choosing words carefully. But Mr. Hayes, that woman has been through significant trauma, psychological as well as physical. She shows signs of severe anxiety, possibly PTSD. There's going to be a long road ahead. Be gentle. After the doctor left, leaving behind instructions and prescriptions and a promise to return tomorrow for a follow-up, Bruno stood outside Iris's door for a full minute before knocking. The sound was soft, almost apologetic. When she didn't answer, he pushed it open slowly. She lay in the bed now, propped up by pillows, the IV line running into her left arm. She'd pulled the blanket up to her chest. Her hair was starting to dry, darker now, but still recognizable as the auburn he remembered. Without the grime and exhaustion obscuring her features, seeing her face clearly hit him all over again. The woman he'd loved. Older now, marked by whatever horrors the past 3 years had carved into her, but still fundamentally her. The recognition felt like falling. Thank you, her voice came out rough, directed at the wall rather than him. For helping me, I'll leave as soon as I can. You're not leaving. The words came out harder than he'd intended, almost a command. Her eyes finally met his. They were still that impossible green, the color that had stopped him cold the first time they'd met at that gallery opening 7 years ago. But the light behind them had dimmed, replaced by something flat and empty. I can't stay here. Why not? Because I don't deserve your kindness. Her voice dropped to barely audible. Because I ruined everything. Bruno pulled the chair from the small desk against the wall and positioned it beside the bed, close enough to talk without raising his voice, but far enough that she wouldn't feel trapped. He sat heavily, exhaustion finally catching up to the adrenaline. Rain still hammered the windows, a steady rhythm that filled the silence between them. I spent 3 years hating you. The admission felt both like confession and accusation. 3 years wondering what I did wrong. 3 years trying to explain to our son why his mother didn't want him anymore. 3 years building a life from the pieces you left behind. Iris flinched as though he had struck her. Tears welled in her eyes and spilled over, tracking down her hollow cheeks. She turned her face away, pressing it into the pillow. But seeing you out there tonight, I realized something. He continued, softer now. Whatever happened, whatever drove you away, it wasn't because you were living some better life without us. Nobody ends up begging in the rain by choice. She made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Her shoulders shook silently. Bruno waited, giving her time to collect herself. The IV bag dripped steadily into her arm fluid, working to repair damage that had taken months or years to inflict. How long had she been on the streets? The question burned, but he forced himself not to ask. Not yet. So I need to know. He kept his voice level, reasonable. Why did you leave? And how did you end up on that corner? The silence stretched so long he thought she wouldn't answer. The rain softened, shifting from downpour to steady drumbeat. Somewhere in the house, the heating system kicked on with a low hum. Iris's breathing gradually evened out, the trembling in her hands subsiding to occasional shivers. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet he had to lean forward to hear. I thought I was protecting you. The words landed like stones. Bruno frowned, trying to parse meaning from a sentence that made no sense. Protecting us from what? Iris closed her eyes. A fresh tear slid down toward the pillow. I thought if I stayed, someone would kill me. And maybe hurt you and Ethan too. The room went very cold. Bruno's pulse kicked up, a slow, heavy thud he could feel in his temples. Somewhere in his mind, rational thought tried to assert itself, offering explanations, paranoia, mental illness, some kind of breakdown. But the raw fear in her voice, the way she'd reacted to him on that street corner, suggested something different, something real. What are you talking about? Not tonight. She opened her eyes but wouldn't meet his gaze. I can't, not tonight. Every instinct told him to push, to demand answers, to refuse to let her shut down. But Mitchell's warning echoed, be gentle. That woman has been through significant trauma. Pushing too hard could send her spiraling, or worse, send her running. And despite everything, despite 3 years of anger and hurt and unanswered questions, Bruno found he couldn't bear the thought of her disappearing again into the night. Get some rest. He stood the chair, scraping softly against hardwood. We'll talk when you're ready. He was almost to the door when her voice stopped him, small and broken in the darkness. Is he okay? A pause. Ethan? Is he happy? Bruno turned back. She was looking at him now, and the desperate hope in her eyes was almost worse than the fear had been. He thought about his son, about the bright, funny 5-year-old who asked about his mother sometimes, in the careful way children learned when a subject hurt the adults around them. The boy who built elaborate block towers and insisted on reading the same 3 books every night. The kid who'd stopped asking where mommy went after about 6 months and learned to simply accept her absence as a permanent feature of reality. He's a good kid. The truth felt both insufficient and overwhelming. Smart. Funny. He asks about you sometimes. Iris covered her face with her hands, the IV line pulling taut. Her whole body convulsed with silent sobs. Bruno watched for a moment, torn between the urge to comfort her and the knowledge that he had no right that they were strangers, now bound only by a shared past and a child who deserved better than either of them had given him. He left her to grieve in private and climbed the stairs to his own room. The rain had finally stopped. He could hear the steady drip of water from the eaves, the last remnants of the storm finding their way to earth. Bruno sat on the edge of his king-size bed, still perfectly made, because he rarely slept well enough to disturb the covers these days, and stared at his phone. The screen showed 17 missed calls, a dozen text messages, most from his assistant, Kelly, wondering where he'd disappeared to after leaving the office. One from his mother asking if Ethan wanted to stay another day. Two from business partners about tomorrow's meetings. He ignored all of them and scrolled to a contact he hadn't used in over 2 years. Richard Cross, private investigator. The man had been the one to finally tell him 3 months into searching that Iris's trail had gone completely cold. She'd withdrawn cash from their joint account the day she left, closed out her personal account, and vanished into thin air. No credit card usage, no phone records, no digital footprint of any kind. Like she'd simply ceased to exist. Bruno's thumbs hovered over the keyboard. Then he typed, "Need to meet. Urgent. Money is no object." The response came within 5 minutes, which was fast even by Cross's standards. "Tomorrow, 10:00 a.m. My office." Bruno set the phone down and lay back on the bed, still fully clothed. Sleep felt impossible. His ex-wife was downstairs, damaged in ways he was only beginning to understand, carrying a story that involved someone wanting her dead. The phrase kept circling back, someone wanted to kill me. Not past tense, present, as though the threat had been ongoing, immediate, real enough to drive her away from everything and everyone she loved. Who and why, the questions multiplied faster than any possible answers. He thought about their life 3 years ago, trying to reconstruct it from memory. They'd been living in a smaller place then, a 2-bedroom in a decent neighborhood before his company took off. Money had been tighter but not scarce. He'd been working brutal hours on the merger with TechFlow, the deal that would eventually launch Hayes Industries into 8 figures. Iris had been freelancing graphic design, mostly work she could do from home while caring for Ethan. They'd been happy, or so he'd thought. Normal relationship stresses, sure exhaustion, bills, the general chaos of having a toddler, but nothing that seemed insurmountable. And then she'd left. The note had been brief, almost cruel in its simplicity. "I can't do this anymore. I need to be free. Don't look for me." The divorce papers arrived a week later with a lawyer's cover sheet. She'd signed away all claim to assets, asked for nothing, wanted no contact. Like she was in a hurry to sever every tie. At the time, he'd been devastated, then angry, then numb. Eventually, he'd convinced himself it was for the best, that she'd never really loved them, that he and Ethan were better off without someone who could walk away so easily. Except she hadn't walked away. She'd been driven. Bruno's mind kept circling back to that, trying to make the pieces fit. Someone had threatened her badly enough that she'd rather spend 3 years on the streets than risk staying. That kind of fear didn't come from nowhere. It was earned, cultivated by real danger, real violence, or the credible threat of it, which meant someone in their life, in their circle, had been dangerous in ways Bruno had completely missed. The thought made him cold. He must have dozed eventually, because when his eyes opened again, gray morning light filtered through the windows. His neck ached from sleeping wrong, and his phone showed a battery warning. 6:30 a.m. The house was silent except for the usual sounds of settling wood and distant traffic. Bruno hauled himself upright, splashed water on his face in the bathroom, and changed into running clothes. He needed to clear his head before the meeting with Cross. Downstairs, he checked on Iris. She was sleeping, or appeared to be curled on her side with the blanket pulled up to her chin. The IV bag was nearly empty. He made a mental note to call Mitchell and retreated to the kitchen. Coffee. He needed coffee. The machine hissed and burbled, filling the space with warmth and bitter aroma. He'd just poured his first cup when footsteps on the stairs made him turn. Iris stood in the doorway, swimming in the oversized clothes he'd given her. She'd attempted to tie her hair back with what looked like a rubber band from somewhere. Dark circles ringed her eyes, but she was upright, awake, and seemed more present than she had been last night. Morning, Bruno kept his voice neutral, following her lead. "There's coffee if you want it." She nodded and moved into the kitchen slowly, like someone navigating unfamiliar terrain. He poured a second cup and slid it across the island toward her. She wrapped both hands around it, absorbing the heat, but didn't drink. Dr. Mitchell left instructions about food. Bruno gestured toward the refrigerator. I can make you something light. Broth maybe, or toast. I'm not really hungry. You need to eat. Again, that edge of command crept into his voice. He couldn't help it. The sight of her wasting away was physically painful. Mitchell said your body isn't used to regular food anymore. We have to reintroduce it slowly. Okay? She said it so quietly he almost missed it, then took a tentative sip of coffee. Her hands still trembled slightly. Bruno started heating chicken broth on the stove, easy on her stomach, something with some nutritional value. They stood in silence while it warmed the kitchen, filled only with the sound of liquid beginning to bubble. When he set the bowl in front of her, she stared at it for a long moment before picking up the spoon. She managed 3 sips before setting it down, looking vaguely nauseated. Bruno didn't push. 3 sips were better than nothing. I have a meeting this morning. He checked his watch. I'll be gone a few hours. There's food in the fridge. Mitchell will stop by around noon to check on you and change the IV. She nodded, still not meeting his eyes. Iris, he waited until she looked up. I meant what I said last night. You're not leaving. Not until we figure this out. Something flickered across her face, too complex to read. Then she looked back down at the broth. Bruno grabbed his keys and headed out. Richard Cross's office occupied the 3rd floor of a building in Midtown that had seen better decades. The elevator was ancient and groaning, the hallway carpet worn thin. But Cross himself was sharp as ever, a man in his mid-50s, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen things most people only read about. He'd been a cop once, back in the 90s before going private. Bruno had hired him twice once to investigate a potential corporate spy, once to find Iris. Cross stood when Bruno entered, shook his hand firmly, and gestured to the chair across from his desk. The office was cluttered with file boxes and outdated tech, but organized chaos rather than genuine mess. A large whiteboard on one wall was covered in case notes for something else, strings connecting photos and names. You sounded urgent on the phone. Cross settled back into his chair. What's going on? Bruno told him. Everything. Finding Iris, her condition, the cryptic warning about someone wanting to kill her. Cross listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad, his expression neutral. When Bruno finished, the investigator leaned back and steepled his fingers beneath his chin. You believe her? The question caught Bruno off guard. Did he? A day ago, if someone had told him Iris was spinning paranoid delusions, he might have bought it. But remembering the raw terror in her eyes, the way she'd lived for 3 years rather than come home, made disbelief impossible. Yes, the word came out certain. I believe something happened that made her afraid enough to disappear completely. Whether it was as extreme as she thinks, I don't know, but it was real to her. Real enough to abandon everything. Cross nodded slowly. I'll need access to your old place, the one you lived in when she left. Any security footage from back then, if you still have it. Phone records. Anyone who had regular contact with your wife before she disappeared. I found a hard drive last night. Bruno had almost forgotten in the chaos. Backed up security cam footage from the old house. It's labeled 3 days before she left. Cross's eyebrows went up. Bring it by this afternoon. I'll go through it frame by frame. What else do you need to talk to her eventually? Not today. Cross held up a hand, forestalling Bruno's protest. She's not in any condition for an interrogation. But Mr. Hayes, if someone threatened your wife badly enough that she fled, that person might still be a threat. To her, maybe to you. Time matters in these situations. The longer we wait, the colder the trail gets. Give me a week. Bruno's voice was steel. She's barely holding it together. Push her too hard and she'll run again. Cross studied him for a long moment, then nodded. 1 week, but I start the background work today. Anyone who was in your life 3 years ago, I'm going to dig into. That means friends, family, employees, neighbors, everyone. Fine. The meeting lasted another 30 minutes as Cross outlined his approach, the resources he'd need, the retainer he'd require. Bruno signed off on everything without hesitation. Money felt meaningless, measured against understanding what had shattered his family. When he finally left the office, the morning sun was climbing higher, burning off the last traces of rain. The city looked washed clean, steaming slightly as heat met moisture. Bruno headed home. Dr. Mitchell's car sat in the driveway. Bruno found him in the guest suite with Iris finishing up the IV swap. She looked marginally less gray than she had that morning, though the improvement was probably more hydration than actual recovery. Mitchell caught Bruno's eye and tilted his head toward the door. They stepped into the hallway. She ate some soup this morning. Not much, but it's a start. The doctor kept his voice low. Her vitals are stabilizing. She should be strong enough to move around by tomorrow, though I'd advise against anything strenuous. And mentally, that's going to take longer. Mitchell's expression was grave. I prescribed medication for the anxiety, but she refused. Said she needs to stay alert. Alert for what? She wouldn't say. But Mr. Hayes, in my professional opinion, your ex-wife has been living in a state of hypervigilance for an extended period. Fight or flight mode constantly activated. That does damage to the nervous system that doesn't heal quickly. She's going to need therapy. Serious sustained therapy. And time. After Mitchell left, Bruno stood outside Iris's door again, that now familiar hesitation settling over him. Every interaction felt like navigating a minefield. He knocked softly and entered without waiting for a response. Iris sat by the window wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the garden. She'd managed to pull her hair back into a loose knot. "How are you feeling?" The question felt inadequate, but he didn't know what else to ask. "Better." She glanced at him briefly, then away. "Thank you for everything." Bruno sat in the chair he was starting to think of as his positioned, close enough for conversation but outside her immediate space. "Ethan comes home tomorrow. I need to know what to tell him." Something flickered across her face. Pain, longing, fear all tangled together. "Tell him I'm a friend, someone you're helping. He won't remember me anyway. He was too young. He asks about you." Bruno's voice was quiet but firm. "Where you went, why you left. If you didn't love him." Tears streamed down her face instantly. "I love him more than anything. That's why I left. Then help me understand, please." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, knuckles white where she gripped the fabric. The garden outside the window showed the first green signs of spring bulbs pushing up through mulch branches starting to bud. Life renewing itself. Inside, Iris looked like she was barely clinging to existence. 3 years ago, her voice came out flat, reciting facts. "Ethan was 2 years old. You were working on that big merger with TechFlow. You were at the office 18 hours a day, sometimes more." Bruno remembered. Those months had been brutal, constant negotiations and due diligence, flying to San Francisco twice a week, sleeping 4 hours if he was lucky. He'd thought at the time that Iris understood that she was being patient with his temporary insanity because the payoff would set them up for life. Instead, he'd been so buried in work, he'd missed every sign that his marriage was disintegrating. "I started getting letters." Iris continued, still staring out the window. "Anonymous. They came into the house, slipped under our door, sometimes at 3 in the morning while we were sleeping." Bruno's blood went cold. "What did they say?" "Leave Bruno or die." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. Over and over. Different words, same message. Sometimes just 2 sentences. Sometimes pages describing what they'd do to me if I didn't go. Jesus Christ. "Why didn't you tell me I tried?" She finally looked at him, and the exhaustion in her eyes was so deep it seemed to have weight. "Remember that night I said we needed to talk? You got a call from your partner at 10 p.m. You left. It was 2 in the morning before you came home, and I was already asleep." He did remember, vaguely. Garrett had called in a panic about something in the contracts. Bruno had driven to the office, spent 4 hours sorting it out, crawled home sometime before dawn. The next morning, Iris had been distant, but he'd assumed she was just tired. He'd kissed her forehead, promised they'd talk soon, and left for another 16-hour day. The guilt hit him like a physical blow. "I tried twice more." Iris's voice stayed matter-of-fact, as though she was describing something that happened to someone else. "You were in meetings, or on planes, and the letters kept coming. So I started thinking maybe it was a prank. Some kid in the neighborhood, bored teenagers trying to scare people. But it wasn't. No." She turned back to the window. "I started noticing things. A car parked outside our house at odd hours. Different cars, always with someone sitting in the driver's seat watching. I'd see the same person behind me when I took Ethan to the park. Never close enough to get a good look, but always there. I felt eyes on me constantly." "Did you tell anyone? Who would I tell? You were unreachable." "I didn't have close friends in the neighborhood. Your mother hated me. The police would have said I was being paranoid. So I started documenting everything. I took photos of the cars, wrote down license plates, kept the letters in a box under our bed. Where are they now?" Iris shook her head. I don't know. When I left everything. I couldn't risk taking anything that might be traced. I had 20 minutes to grab what I could carry. I chose survival over evidence. What changed? You said you thought it was a prank at first. What made you realize it was real? She was quiet for so long. Bruno thought she wouldn't answer. Outside, a bird landed on the windowsill, pecked at something, flew away. The sun moved behind a cloud, dimming the light in the room. When Iris finally spoke again, her voice was barely audible. One night I woke up and the bedroom window was open. I know I locked it. I checked it twice before bed because I was already so afraid. But it was open, wide open, and there were muddy footprints on the windowsill. Someone had been inside our house while we slept. Bruno's hands gripped the armrests hard enough that his knuckles turned white. The thought of someone climbing through their window, standing in the room where his wife and son slept, made him physically ill. You should have told me then. Right then. I wanted to. Iris's voice cracked. But you were in New York for that week. I called you 3 times. You were in back-to-back meetings. You texted that you'd call me back and never did. So I told myself I was being irrational. Hormones, paranoia. I'd locked the window, forgotten, and the wind blew it open. The footprints were from the landscaper. I convinced myself of anything except the truth, which was that someone was escalating. Someone wanted me terrified enough to leave on my own, but when I stayed anyway, they moved to the next phase. What phase? She looked at him then, and her eyes held something dark and final. They tried to kill me. The words landed like a physical blow. Bruno's mind reeled, trying to process, trying to find an alternative explanation. Iris kept talking, her voice steady now, as though having started this story, she needed to finish it. I was crossing the street near our house. Daytime, bright sun. I looked both ways, the road was clear, and I stepped off the curb. A car came out of nowhere. It didn't swerve to miss me. It didn't brake. It aimed right at me and accelerated. The accident. Bruno's voice sounded distant in his own ears. You told me it was a hit and run. It was. But it wasn't an accident. Her hands twisted in the blanket, knuckles white. Someone was trying to kill me. I spent 3 days in the hospital. The doctor said it was a miracle I didn't lose Ethan. A miracle he survived the impact. You were pregnant 8 weeks. I hadn't told you yet because you were so stressed with the merger. I wanted to wait for the right time. Iris laughed bitterly. There never was a right time. Bruno couldn't speak. His mind had gone blank, short-circuited by information it couldn't process. Iris had been pregnant. Someone had hit her with a car. His unborn child had nearly died. And he'd been in meetings oblivious, treating the whole thing like an unfortunate accident instead of attempted murder. After that, I couldn't think straight. Iris continued into the silence. I was so afraid all the time. Afraid to sleep. Afraid to leave the house. Afraid every car on the street was going to jump the curb and finish what they'd started. I kept thinking about who could hate me enough to do this, and I kept coming back to one person. Who? Your mother. The name hung in the air between them, like accusation and confession both. Bruno's chest constricted. His mother had never approved of Iris, had made that abundantly clear from the moment he'd introduced them. She'd wanted him to marry someone from their social circle, someone with family money and connections. A graphic designer from Oregon with art school debt didn't fit the picture she'd painted for his future. She'd been cold, occasionally cruel, definitely manipulative. But murder, she told me at our wedding that I'd never be good enough for you. Iris's voice was hollow. That I was dragging you down. That eventually you'd realize your mistake. She said she'd make sure you did. That doesn't mean I know. Iris cut him off. I know it sounds insane. I had no proof, just letters with no fingerprints and a car that was never found. Who was going to believe me? Your own mother. The police would have laughed me out of the station. I would have believed you. But even as Bruno said it, the words felt hollow. Would he have 3 years ago when he was buried in work and exhausted, and his mother had been actively involved in his life, helping with Ethan, offering advice on the business? If Iris had come to him with this story, with no evidence beyond anonymous letters, and her own fear, would he have taken her seriously? Or would he have suggested therapy? Maybe time off, some way of explaining away what felt impossible. Would you really? Iris met his eyes, and the challenge in them was devastating. Would you really have believed your wife over your own mother with no proof? Or would you have thought I was having some kind of breakdown, postpartum psychosis maybe? stress, anything except the truth. Bruno wanted to argue, wanted to insist he'd have stood by her, believed her, protected her. But the honest answer stuck in his throat. He didn't know. And that uncertainty must have shown on his face because Iris nodded slowly. I decided the only way to keep Ethan safe was to leave. If I disappeared, whoever wanted me dead would stop. You could raise our son in peace. He'd grow up without his mother, but at least he'd grow up alive. So you signed divorce papers and vanished. Bruno's voice was rough. You made it look like you wanted out, like you'd found someone else. I thought if you hated me, it would be easier. You'd move on, maybe even meet someone who deserved you. The tears were flowing freely now, and Ethan would have a mother who could actually keep him safe instead of one who brought danger to his doorstep. For 3 years, the magnitude of it was crushing. You lived on the streets for 3 years because you thought it would protect us. I lived in shelters at first, cheap motels when I could find under-the-table work. But I couldn't use my real name, couldn't apply for courts that needed background checks or references. Eventually, even the cash dried up. I just disappeared into the streets, became invisible. And every day I told myself Ethan was safe, that it was worth it. The silence that followed was enormous. Bruno sat with his head in his hands trying to process the enormity of what Iris had just told him. Someone had terrorized her for months. Someone had tried to kill her and his unborn child. Someone had driven her away from everything she loved, and he'd been too busy making money to notice. The guilt felt like drowning. I'm going to find who did this. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold and flat. And they're going to pay for every second you spent afraid. Iris shook her head. It's been 3 years. The trail is ice cold. It's over. It's not over until I have answers. He stood pacing to the window and back. I've already hired an investigator. He's going to go through everything from back then. Security footage, phone records, everyone who had contact with you. We'll find them. And then what? Iris's voice turned sharp. What are you going to do, Bruno? Have them arrested for what? Sending anonymous letters. Good luck proving who sent them, the car. They never found it, never found the driver. The police closed the case after a week. There's nothing to find. There's always something, not this time. She pulled the blanket tighter, curling into herself. Some people are smart enough not to leave evidence. And some horrors don't have neat solutions. So you just want to give up. Let whoever did this walk free. I want to survive. Iris's voice broke. I want to see my son grow up. I want to stop being afraid every second of every day. I want to feel human again. Finding them won't do any of that. It'll just drag me back into the nightmare. Bruno opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She was right in a way that made him furious. Even if they found evidence, even if they proved who'd terrorized her, it wouldn't undo 3 years on the streets. Wouldn't erase the trauma carved into her bones. Wouldn't give Ethan back the mother who should have been there for his first day of school, his first lost tooth, all the moments that built a childhood. We'll figure it out. The promise felt inadequate. Just rest for now. We have time. But even as he said it, doubt crept in. Time they had lost 3 years already. And if the person who'd driven Iris away discovered she was back, what would stop them from trying again? The question sat cold and heavy in his chest as he left her alone with her ghosts. The rest of the day passed in a strange half-reality. Bruno worked from his home office, handling emails and calls with half his attention, while the other half stayed fixed on the guest suite downstairs where his broken ex-wife was trying to sleep. He ordered groceries, made sure the refrigerator had easy foods Iris might be able to stomach. Called Mitchell again to ask about nutrition plans for someone in her condition. Fielded a text from his mother asking when she should bring Ethan home. Tomorrow afternoon, he wrote back, buying himself one more day before having to navigate the impossibility of explaining Iris's presence to their son. Evening came with a sunset that painted the garden in shades of amber and gold. Bruno made simple dinner, grilled chicken rice, steamed vegetables, and brought a small portion to Iris. She managed half of it before pushing the plate away, looking nauseated. Progress, he told himself. Small steps. She was eating. That mattered. After dinner, he found her in the living room, curled into the corner of the couch with a blanket staring at nothing. The television was off the room, quiet except for the ambient sounds of the house settling. Bruno poured himself a whiskey and sat in the chair across from her. For a while, neither spoke. Did you mean it? Iris's voice broke the silence. That he asks about me? Bruno took a sip of whiskey, letting the burn ground him. All the time, especially on Mother's Day, Christmas, anytime he sees other kids with their moms at school events. He doesn't understand why you left. I tried to explain, but what was I supposed to say? That you didn't love us enough to stay. I loved you so much it terrified me. Her voice was barely audible. Every night I'd lie awake thinking if something happened to Ethan because of me, I'd die. Actually die. My heart would stop from guilt. So I chose to die a different way. Slowly, on the streets, away from him, because at least then he'd be safe. He's 5 years old and he thinks his mother abandoned him because he wasn't good enough. Iris made a sound like all the air had been punched from her lungs. Don't. Please, you asked. Bruno set the glass down with more force than necessary. The truth is ugly. He thinks you didn't want him. And I spent 3 years confirming that belief because I thought it was true. Because you made me think it was true. I'm sorry. The words dissolved into sobs. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what else to do. I was so afraid and I couldn't think and I thought, you thought leaving was the only option. Bruno's anger evaporated as quickly as it had risen, replaced by exhaustion. And maybe it was. I don't know. I wasn't there. I wasn't paying attention. I failed you long before you left. They sat in silence again, both drowning in different versions of guilt. Outside, the last light faded. Stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Bruno thought about tomorrow, about bringing Ethan home to a house that contained a woman his son wouldn't remember, about trying to explain the unexplainable, about rebuilding something from ruins. I'll tell him you're a friend who needs help, Bruno finally said. Someone I knew from before who's staying with us for a while. We'll take it slow. Let him get used to you being here before. Before what? Iris looked at him with hollow eyes. Before we tell him I'm his mother, the woman who chose to beg on streets, rather than raise him. That's a story that ends well. Before we figure out what comes next. Bruno stood suddenly too tired to keep navigating this conversation. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hard. He climbed the stairs to his room and lay awake until the early hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to see a path forward through the impossible tangle of the present. His ex-wife was downstairs, traumatized and fragile. His son would be home in less than 24 hours, unaware that his world was about to shift on its axis. And somewhere out there, someone who'd driven Iris away through terror and violence was walking free, possibly not even knowing she'd survived to return. The thought kept him awake long past midnight, mapping possibilities, discarding plans, trying to find some way to protect everyone he loved from threats both known and hidden. By the time he finally slept, the sky was already beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn. Morning arrived whether he was ready or not. Bruno forced himself through a shower and shaved, dressed in clothes that felt wrong against his skin, everything too tight or loose. Downstairs, he found Iris already awake, sitting at the kitchen island with the cup of coffee he'd started before heading upstairs. She'd attempted to brush her hair. The effort showed. Ethan comes home at 3. Bruno poured his own cup, strong and black. My mother's bringing him. I'll keep the visit short. Iris nodded, not meeting his eyes. The day crawled forward. Bruno worked or tried to. Richard Cross called around 11 to say he'd started going through the hard drive footage, that there were things worth discussing, but he wanted to complete the review first. Mitchell stopped by at noon to check Iris's vitals, pronounce her stable, and leave more instructions about nutrition and medications she continued refusing. The hours felt elastic, stretched thin by anticipation and dread. At 3:15, Bruno's phone buzzed with a text from his mother. We're here. He met them at the front door. Ethan burst in with his usual energy, talking about the movie they'd watched, the park visit, a squirrel he'd named Jeffrey. Bruno's mother followed, elegant as always in tailored clothes and perfect makeup, her expression carefully neutral when she saw Bruno's face. Everything all right? She kept her voice low for adults only. You look terrible. Fine, long night. Bruno crouched to Ethan's level. Hey, buddy, did you have fun at Grandma's? The best. Can we go to the park now? It's not raining anymore. In a bit. First, I need to tell you something. Ethan's face fell slightly, the way it always did when adult seriousness intruded on his world. Did I do something wrong? No, nothing like that. Bruno glanced up at his mother, who was watching with sharp eyes that missed nothing. A friend of mine is staying with us for a while. She's been sick and needs somewhere safe to recover. Her name is Iris. You might see her around the house. Is she nice? Yes. Very nice. But remember, she's not feeling well, so we need to be quiet and respectful. Okay? Okay. Ethan's attention was already wandering toward the stairs. Can I show her my Lego spaceship? Maybe later. Why don't you go put your backpack in your room? I need to talk to Grandma for a minute. Ethan raced upstairs, a blur of 5-year-old energy and complete lack of suspicion. Bruno's mother waited until he was out of earshot before speaking. Iris, her voice was careful, probing. That's an unusual name. Don't think I know anyone she's from before. Bruno cut her off, not wanting to have this conversation, not with her. Not now. Old friend who fell on hard times. I'm helping her get back on her feet. How generous of you. The tone suggested she didn't buy a word of it. You've always had such a soft heart for strays. She's not a stray. The edge in Bruno's voice made his mother's eyebrows rise slightly. She's someone who needed help. I could provide it. End of story. Of course. His mother smoothed her jacket, preparing to leave. Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me. After she left, Bruno stood in the foyer for a long moment, tension slowly releasing from his shoulders. That woman had a talent for making him feel simultaneously guilty and defensive. He headed toward Iris's suite to warn her that Ethan was home. He found her standing by the window, staring out with the fixed intensity of someone trying to memorize a view they might never see again. He's here. Bruno kept his distance. Ethan, he's upstairs putting his things away. You don't have to see him if you're not ready. I heard his voice. Fresh tears tracked down her face. He sounds so different, so grown up. He's 5 now, almost 6. I missed everything. The words came out choked. His first day of school, learning to ride a bike, all of it. You're here now. Bruno's voice was gentler than he felt. That has to count for something. Before Iris could respond, the patter of small feet announced Ethan's return. He appeared in the doorway, curiosity bright on his face, and stopped short when he saw Iris. For a moment, both of them froze. Mother and son separated by 3 years, in an ocean of pain staring at each other across a guest suite that felt simultaneously too large and too small. Are you the sick lady? Ethan's voice held no accusation, only the straightforward interest of a child. Dad said you needed help. Iris opened her mouth, nothing came out. She looked at Bruno, panic flaring in her eyes, and he stepped forward quickly. This is Iris. He kept his voice light normal. She's staying with us for a while, like I said. Iris, this is my son, Ethan. Why do you need help? Ethan took a step closer, peering at her with the frank assessment children specialized in. Are you very sick? I was. Iris's voice came out rough, unpracticed. But I'm getting better now. Your dad's been very kind to let me stay here. Dad's the best. Ethan said it with the absolute certainty of a child who still believed in heroes. He can fix anything. The innocence of it broke something visible in Iris's expression. She turned away sharply, one hand pressed to her mouth. Bruno caught Ethan's shoulder before he could ask what was wrong. Remember what I said about Iris needing quiet? Why don't you go play in your room for a bit? Maybe we can go to the park before dinner. Okay. Ethan cast one more curious look at Iris, then bounded off with the resilience of a kid whose world still made sense. Bruno waited until his footsteps faded before approaching Iris. I can't do this. She was shaking. I thought I could. I thought I was strong enough. But seeing him, hearing his voice, knowing he doesn't know who I am, I can't. You don't have to do anything except breathe right now. Bruno kept his voice level. One moment at a time. That's all either of us can handle. She nodded but didn't look convinced. Bruno left her alone, unsure whether that was kindness or cowardice, and went to find his son. Ethan was in his room, sprawled on the floor, surrounded by Lego pieces, working on the spaceship he'd mentioned. Bruno sat down beside him. What do you think of Iris? He kept the question casual. Ethan shrugged, focused on connecting 2 pieces. She seems sad. She's been through a lot. Did someone hurt her? Ethan looked up with eyes too knowing for his age. Is that why she's sad? Sometimes people go through hard things, and it takes time for them to feel better afterward. Like when Mom left. Ethan's voice dropped to something quieter. Were you sad then? Question hit Bruno like a punch. He took a breath, steadying himself. Yes, I was very sad. Do you think Mom was sad too? I don't know, buddy. Bruno pulled his son into a hug, holding on perhaps tighter than necessary. I'd like to think she was. They sat like that for a while, father and son, surrounded by scattered pieces, waiting to be built into something whole. Outside, the sun moved lower. Shadows lengthened. In the guest suite, Iris cried silently, trying to breathe through an ache that had lived in her chest for 3 years. And somewhere in the city, someone who'd driven her away continued their life unaware that the ghost they'd created had returned. Bruno made dinner spaghetti, Ethan's favorite, and called them both to the kitchen. Iris appeared like a shade, moving carefully, sitting at the far end of the table. Ethan chattered through the meal about school, his friends, the upcoming field trip to the science museum. Normal kid things. Iris listened without speaking, and once Bruno caught her looking at Ethan with such raw longing, it was physically painful to witness. After dinner, Ethan asked if Iris wanted to see his spaceship. She glanced at Bruno, uncertain. He nodded. They went upstairs together, his son leading the way with easy confidence, his ex-wife following, like someone navigating a minefield. Bruno cleaned the kitchen, loaded the dishwasher, tried not to think about how surreal this all was. 24 hours ago, Iris had been a ghost. Now she was upstairs with their son, and Bruno had no idea if that was healing or cruelty. He found them in Ethan's room an hour later. Iris sat on the floor beside his son, watching as he explained the intricate details of his creation. She was crying again in silent tears, but she was also smiling. Ethan, oblivious to the adult complexity unfolding around him, just kept talking, thrilled to have an audience. "Bath time, buddy," Bruno's voice interrupted gently. "School tomorrow. Can Iris help?" Ethan looked between them with hopeful eyes. "She could read me a story after." Iris's expression shattered. "I don't think—" "Please," Ethan's voice held no manipulation, just simple wanting. "You seem nice, and Dad said you needed help feeling better. Stories help me feel better when I'm sad." Bruno watched Iris struggle, watched every instinct tell her to run, warring with the desperate need to stay, to be part of this moment. This tiny, normal thing that mothers and sons did together. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, one story." Ethan's face lit up. He grabbed her hand, dragging her toward the bathroom, chattering about his favorite books. Bruno followed, keeping distance, ready to intervene if necessary. But bath time went smoothly. Ethan narrated his routine. Iris helped rinse his hair when asked, and the domesticity of it felt both impossible and inevitable. Afterward, they gathered in Ethan's room for story time. His son produced a worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are, his go-to comfort book. Iris took it with shaking hands and began to read. Her voice was rough at first, unpracticed, but it smooth as she found the rhythm. Ethan curled against her side, completely trusting, and Iris put her free arm around him. Bruno stood in the doorway, watching mother and child reunited without either of them fully understanding what was happening. When the story ended, Ethan yawned hugely. Iris set the book aside and looked at Bruno. He nodded toward the door. They slipped out as Ethan burrowed under his covers. In the hallway, Iris stood with her back to the wall, arms wrapped around herself. "Thank you." Her voice was barely audible. "For letting me do that. He's your son, too. He doesn't know that. To him, I'm just some sad lady his dad's helping. And maybe that's better. Maybe it's easier if he never knows what I did." Bruno had no answer to that. The truth felt both necessary and cruel. They stood in silence for a moment, then Iris retreated to her suite, and Bruno went to his office. He had work to catch up on, emails piling up, but he couldn't focus. His mind kept cycling back to Iris, reading to Ethan, to the way she'd held him, to the grief written across her face. His phone buzzed. A text from Richard Cross. "Found something. Need to see you tomorrow morning. Early." Bruno stared at the message. Found something. Which meant the investigation had turned up evidence, trails, answers to questions he'd been asking for 3 years. Tomorrow morning felt impossibly far away. He texted back 7 a.m. The response was immediate. "See you then?" Bruno set the phone down and leaned back in his chair. Tomorrow he'd know more. Tomorrow pieces might start fitting together. Tonight he just had to make it through the dark hours with an ex-wife who'd survived hell, a son who didn't know his mother was 20 feet away, and questions that multiplied faster than any possible answers. Sleep, when it finally came, was thin and troubled. He dreamed of Iris on that street corner, reaching toward him with a cup full of rain. He dreamed of Ethan asking where Mommy went, over and over, the question echoing until it was all he could hear. He dreamed of a faceless figure climbing through their bedroom window 3 years ago, while they slept, standing over the bed watching. He woke at 5 a.m. in a cold sweat, heart pounding. The house was silent. Gray pre-dawn light filtered through the windows. Bruno hauled himself up, showered in water hot enough to hurt, and dressed for the meeting with Cross. Downstairs, he found Iris already awake, sitting at the kitchen island with coffee going cold in front of her. Couldn't sleep. Bruno poured his own cup. She shook her head. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there. On the street. Or running. Always running. I'm meeting with the investigator this morning. He's found something. Iris's face went white. Already, it's been 3 years. There are trails, records. Someone knows something. Bruno, her voice was urgent now. Please don't do this. Just let it go. We can move forward without knowing. Digging into the past will only what Bruno's voice was harder than he intended. Give us answers, justice, closure. We'll only put targets on our backs again. Iris stood abruptly, coffee sloshing. Whoever did this, they're still out there. If they find out I'm back, if they know you're investigating, they'll come after me again. Maybe after Ethan this time. So we do nothing. Let them get away with terrorizing you, with nearly killing our child. Yes. Her voice broke. Yes, we do nothing. We survive. We rebuild. We forget. I can't forget. Bruno met her eyes, and neither can you. Running from this hasn't worked. 3 years on the streets didn't make you safe. It just made you suffer. Maybe it's time to stop running and face whatever's chasing you. Iris stared at him for a long moment, then turned and fled back to her suite. The door closed with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam. Bruno stood alone in his kitchen, holding coffee he no longer wanted, wondering if he was doing the right thing or making a catastrophic mistake. At 6:45, he left for Cross's office. The streets were quiet, early morning traffic just beginning to build. The drive gave him too much time to think, to second guess, to wonder what the investigator had found that required an emergency meeting. When he arrived, Cross was already there, looking like he hadn't slept either. Show me. Bruno didn't bother with pleasantries. Cross nodded and led him to a back room where a laptop sat open on a desk. The screen showed grainy security footage paused on a frame of their old street. Your ex-wife was right to be afraid. Cross's voice was grim. Someone was definitely watching your house. Look at this. He hit play. The footage rolled, showing their old front door, the street beyond. A car pulled up across the street and parked. 30 minutes passed in accelerated time. Then the car drove away. Cross skippered forward. The same car returned the next day. And the next. Always parking in view of the house. Always staying 20 to 40 minutes before leaving. I ran the plates. Cross switched to a different window showing DMV records. Registered to a woman named Kelly Mitchell. Does that name mean anything to you? Bruno's blood went ice cold. The room tilted slightly. Kelly, his assistant, his right hand for 5 years. The person who'd been by his side through every major deal, who brought him coffee exactly how he liked it, who'd consoled him after Iris left. She works for me. His voice sounded distant. She's my executive assistant. Cross's expression was grim. There's more. Let me show you the accident footage. He pulled up another file. Different angle, different day. Iris crossing the street exactly as she described. Midday bright sun, looking both ways, stepping off the curb. And then a car, that same car, accelerating from a parked position. Not someone who didn't see her. Not someone who swerved too late. Deliberate. Aimed. The impact was sickening, even on the grainy footage. Iris going down the car, speeding away without stopping. Cross zoomed in frame by frame. The driver's window, a figure behind the wheel, female, dark hair. And when she reached to shift gears, her hand appeared in frame. On the back of that hand was a distinctive scar, crescent moon-shaped pale against tan skin. Bruno knew that scar. He'd asked about it once during a late night at the office. Kelly had laughed and said she'd burned herself on a stove as a child, that it had never quite healed right. He thought nothing of it at the time. Now seeing it on the hand that had nearly killed his wife, he couldn't breathe. It's her. The words came out strangled. Kelly, she did this. I need to bring this to the police. Cross closed the laptop. With this evidence, they can... No, Bruno's voice was sharp. Not yet. Cross frowned. Mr. Hayes, if she did this 3 years ago, she might try again now that your ex-wife is back. We need to be smart. Bruno's mind was racing. If Kelly knows we found evidence, she could run, destroy records, disappear. I want to know why she did this, and I want to make sure she can never threaten my family again. What are you suggesting? A trap. Bruno's voice was cold. She doesn't know I've found this footage. As far as Kelly knows, Iris is just some homeless woman I'm helping. I bring Iris back into the light. Make sure Kelly sees her, knows who she really is, and we watch what Kelly does next. That's dangerous. So is letting her walk free. Bruno stood. I need a day, maybe two, to set this up properly. Can you give me that? Cross studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 2 days. But after that, I'm going to the police with or without your cooperation. Understood. Understood. Bruno drove home with his hands clenched white on the steering wheel, rage and fear and betrayal churning in his chest. Kelly. He trusted her with his schedule, his passwords, access to his home, and his son. And she'd use that trust to terrorize Iris, to drive her away, nearly kill her. The reasons why couldn't matter because no explanation would make it forgivable. When he got home, Iris was in the living room, still dressed in the clothes from earlier, staring at nothing. Bruno sat across from her. It was my assistant. His voice was flat. Kelly, she was watching our house. She's the one who hit you with the car. I saw the footage. Iris's face went absolutely white. No, I saw the scar on her hand. The footage is clear enough. It was her. Why would she? Iris shook her head, trying to process. Your assistant, I barely knew her. We met maybe twice. Why would she want to hurt me? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Bruno leaned forward. And I need your help to do it. He explained the plan. Bring Iris back into public view. Make sure Kelly knew who she was. Watch what Kelly did next. Set the trap and wait for her to spring it. Iris listened with growing horror. You want to use me as bait? Her voice shook. You want to dangle me in front of the woman who tried to kill me and see what happens. I want justice. Bruno's voice was hard. I want her to pay for what she did. And yes, there's risk. But we'll have people watching. Cross will monitor everything. She won't be able to hurt you again. You can't promise that. Iris stood pacing. You don't know what she's capable of. She's been close to you for years. She knows your security, your patterns, everything. This is insane. More insane than letting her go free. Bruno stood too, meeting her eyes. She drove you into 3 years of hell. She nearly killed our child. She deserves to rot in prison, and this is how we make sure that happens. And if she succeeds this time, if she kills me for real, then what? Then I make sure she never sees daylight again. Bruno's voice dropped to something cold and final. But that won't happen. I won't let it. They stared at each other, the space between them filled with all the history and hurt and impossible choices that had brought them to this moment. Finally, Iris nodded. Okay. Her voice was barely audible. I'll do it, but if this goes wrong, it won't. Bruno hoped he sounded more confident than he felt. They spent the rest of the day planning. Bruno called Cross back, outlined the strategy, got the investigators' reluctant agreement to provide surveillance. They'd install more cameras, hidden ones covering every angle. Cross would watch the feeds in real time. Bruno would make sure Kelly knew Iris was there, make sure she understood exactly who this woman was. And then they'd wait. That night, after Ethan was in bed, Iris came to Bruno's office where he sat reviewing security protocols. She stood in the doorway wrapped in one of his old sweaters she'd found somewhere. I never stopped loving you. The confession fell into the quiet room like a stone into still water. Through everything, through all the fear and the pain and the years of running, I never stopped. Bruno looked up at her, this ghost who'd come back to life, this woman who'd sacrificed everything she was to protect what she loved. Something in his chest cracked open. I never stopped either. The admission felt both like relief and surrender. I tried. God knows I tried, but I couldn't. What do we do now? Her voice was small. We start over. Not where we were, where we are. Two broken people who love each other, trying to figure out how to be a family again. Iris moved into the room, crossed to where he sat, and touched his face with trembling fingers. He caught her hand, held it against his cheek, and for the first time in 3 years, allowed himself to hope. But outside in the city that never slept, Kelly Mitchell was going about her evening unaware that the ghost she'd created had returned. Unaware that the trap was closing. unaware that her carefully constructed life was about to detonate. The storm was coming, and this time Bruno would make sure Iris wasn't facing it alone. Morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of sharp winter light that made everything feel exposed. Bruno stood in his kitchen, nursing coffee that had gone lukewarm, watching Iris push scrambled eggs around her plate without eating. Ethan had left for school 20 minutes ago, chattering about show and tell, oblivious to the tension radiating between the adults he'd left behind. The plan was simple in theory, dangerous in execution. Bruno would call Kelly, casually mention that his ex-wife had returned and was staying at the house. Let that information settle. Then they'd wait for Kelly to make her move. Cross had spent the night installing additional cameras throughout the property, tiny lenses hidden in smoke detectors, picture frames, the carved wooden bowl on the entry table. Every angle covered, every room monitored from the van parked 3 blocks away where Cross and his team would maintain constant surveillance. You don't have to do this. Bruno said it for the 3rd time that morning. We can go straight to the police with the footage. Iris set down her fork. Her hand was steady now, steadier than it had been since he'd found her. And they'll arrest her based on grainy security footage from 3 years ago. A lawyer will shred it. Reasonable doubt, poor video quality, circumstantial evidence. You said it yourself, we need a confession. She was right, which made the knot in Bruno's chest pull tighter. He picked up his phone, pulled up Kelly's contact, and hesitated. For 5 years, this woman had been indispensable to his professional life. She'd managed his calendar with military precision, anticipated his needs before he voiced them, worked late nights and early mornings without complaint. He'd given her bonuses, relied on her judgment, trusted her with access to virtually everything. And she'd spent that time systematically destroying the woman he loved. The call connected on the 2nd ring. Kelly's voice came through bright and efficient. Good morning, Mr. Hayes. I was just about to send you the updated brief for the Singapore meeting. Can you come by the house today? Bruno kept his voice casual, businessman requesting a favor. There's something we need to discuss. Personal matter. A pause brief enough that someone who didn't know Kelly well might miss it. But Bruno had worked with her long enough to hear the curiosity beneath the professional veneer. Of course. What time works for you this afternoon? Around 2. I'll be there. The call ended. Bruno set the phone down, aware of Iris watching him with those hollow green eyes that had seen too much. She's coming. His voice was flat. The next 4 hours crawled. Bruno worked from his home office, responding to emails with half his attention while the other half stayed fixed on the clock. Cross called twice to confirm equipment was functioning, that the audio feeds were clear, that his team was in position. Iris retreated to her room and emerged only once to drink water she couldn't keep down. The fear had her in its grip, again that constant low-level terror that had become her baseline. At 1:45, Bruno found her standing in the guest suite bathroom, staring at her reflection with something like horror. I can't do this. Her voice shook. When she sees me, when she realizes I'm alive, what? Bruno kept his voice gentle. There are 5 cameras in this house. Cross is watching everything. 2 of his people are parked outside. She can't hurt you. She almost did before, with you right there, with witnesses around. She doesn't care about consequences. Then we'll make sure the consequences find her this time. The doorbell chimed at exactly 2 p.m. Kelly's punctuality had always been flawless. Bruno answered, and there she was, mid-30s, dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, professional but approachable in slacks and a cashmere sweater. She carried a wicker basket covered with checkered cloth. I brought lunch. Kelly's smile was warm, genuine to anyone who didn't know what she was. Homemade soup, fresh bread. I figured with everything you've been dealing with, a home-cooked meal might help. That's thoughtful. Bruno stepped aside, letting her enter the foyer. Actually, there's someone I'd like you to meet. He led her to the living room where Iris sat perched on the edge of the couch, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Kelly followed, still holding the basket, and stopped dead when she saw Iris's face. For half a second, genuine shock flickered across her features before the professional mask slammed back into place. Kelly, this is Iris. Bruno watched both women carefully. My ex-wife. She's staying with us while she gets back on her feet. Kelly's smile never wavered, but her knuckles went white where she gripped the basket handle. It's nice to meet you. I've heard so much about you over the years. Bruno mentioned you were staying here. She hadn't heard anything of the kind. Bruno had deliberately kept Iris's presence quiet from everyone except Cross. But Kelly's training was excellent. She adapted instantly, playing the role of gracious colleague, meeting the boss's house guest. Thank you for the food. Iris's voice came out thin but steady. That's very kind. Kelly moved to the coffee table and began unpacking the basket. A large thermos, 3 cups cloth napkins, a container of what looked like chicken soup. Her movements were practiced efficient, and Bruno noticed how she positioned herself with her back to them while she worked, hands hidden from view, as she poured liquid from the thermos into each cup. I made tea as well. Kelly turned, offering the first cup to Iris. It's a special blend, very calming. I thought you might need something soothing after everything you've been through. She extended the cup toward Iris with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Iris reached for it, and Bruno saw Kelly's expression shift just for a microsecond into something predatory and satisfied. In that instant, he knew. Whatever was in that cup, it wasn't just tea. Actually, Bruno stepped forward smoothly, intercepting the exchange. Why don't we switch? I could use something calming myself. The merger talks have been brutal. He took the cup from Kelly's hand and offered it back to her while passing a different cup to Iris. Kelly's smile froze, becoming something carved and brittle. Oh, that's not necessary. Her voice stayed light but gained an edge. I made that one specifically for your ex-wife. Different honey blend. I insist. Bruno kept his eyes locked on hers. Drink it, Kelly. The silence that followed felt enormous. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. Outside, traffic hummed. Kelly stared at the cup in her hand, then at Bruno, and something shifted behind her eyes. The mask cracked, slipped, fell away entirely. What remained was raw and desperate and utterly cold. You know, it wasn't a question. Her voice had changed completely, losing all warmth. How long have you known long enough? Bruno's voice stayed level despite the rage building in his chest. I found the security footage. Saw you watching our house. Saw you hit her with your car. Kelly laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. Of course you did. I should have destroyed those hard drives, but I thought she'd done that before she ran. Sloppy of me. Why, the word came from Iris, barely louder than breath. Why did you do this? Kelly turned to her, and the hatred in her gaze was pure and terrible. Because you were in the way. You were always in the way. Bruno moved slightly, positioning himself between them without making it obvious. Kelly noticed, and that brittle smile returned. Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt her now. Not with you standing right there. Not with, she glanced around, taking in the room with new understanding, whatever surveillance you've obviously set up. You're smarter than I gave you credit for, Bruno. I always thought you were too soft, too trusting. Guess I was wrong. You terrorized her for months. Bruno's voice was cold steel. You broke into our house. You tried to kill her and my child. Why? Kelly set the cup down carefully on the coffee table, that false composure returning. Because I love you. The words came out simple, matter of fact, as though this explained everything. I've loved you since the day I started working for you. You were everything I wanted. Smart, ambitious, driven. We were perfect together. We were never together. Bruno felt sick. You worked for me, that's all. In your mind, maybe. Kelly's voice turned sharp. But I saw how you looked at me during those late nights, how you relied on me, how you told me things you didn't tell anyone else. You needed me, Bruno. We had something real. And then there was her. She spat the last word at Iris with pure venom. Iris flinched but held her ground. She was nobody. Kelly continued, the words spilling out now like poison she'd been storing for years. A freelance artist with no ambition. She was making you soft, making you weak. I watched you change after you married her. Watched you become less focused, less driven. She was holding you back from everything you could be. So you decided to get rid of her. Bruno's hands clenched into fists at his sides, by scaring her to death. I wanted her gone. Kelly shrugged, casual about attempted murder. I didn't particularly care how. I started with the letters, hoping she'd just leave on her own. When that didn't work, I escalated. Followed her around, let her see me watching, made her feel hunted. It was easy, really. She was already anxious, already isolated because you were never home. Breaking her was simple. You broke into our house. Bruno's voice shook now. While we were sleeping, through the bedroom window. Kelly smiled at the memory. You'd left it unlocked. I stood there watching you both sleep for almost an hour. I could have killed her then, but I wanted her afraid first. wanted her to run on her own. It would have been cleaner that way. But she didn't run. Iris's voice was stronger now, anger cutting through the fear. So you tried to kill me. I borrowed my brother's car. Kelly met her eyes without flinching, waited for the right moment. You were so predictable, always taking the same route to the grocery store, always crossing at the same intersection. I just had to wait for a day when there weren't too many witnesses around. The timing worked out perfectly. You hit me and drove away. Iris's voice cracked. I was pregnant. You almost killed my baby. Kelly's expression didn't change. I didn't know about the pregnancy. If I had, I might have waited. Or maybe not. Either way, you survived. That was unfortunate. The casual evil of it stole Bruno's breath. He stared at this woman he'd trusted, worked beside, relied upon, and saw a stranger. A monster wearing a familiar face. I watched you grieve after she left. Kelly's voice softened slightly, turning almost tender. You were heartbroken, yes, but you were also free. I stayed close, brought you coffee, listened when you needed to talk, waited for you to realize we belonged together. It was just a matter of time. I never looked at you that way. Bruno forced the words out. Not once, not ever, not yet. Kelly's voice gained conviction. But you would have. Eventually, once you'd healed, once enough time had passed, you'd have seen what was right in front of you all along. We could have built an empire together, Bruno. We could have had everything. And when she came back, Bruno gestured toward Iris. When you saw she was alive, what then? Then I had to finish what I started. Kelly's voice went flat again. I couldn't let her ruin everything a second time. So yes, I put sleeping pills in that tea, enough to make her very sick, enough that she might not wake up depending on her condition. It seemed like the kindest option, really. She'd just drift away. Painless, painless. Bruno repeated the word, disbelief making his voice rise. You think attempted murder is painless? More painless than what she put herself through. Kelly gestured at Iris dismissively. 3 years on the streets, that was her choice. I gave her a clean way out 3 years ago. She chose to suffer instead. I chose to protect my son. Iris stood, and despite her fragility, despite the way she still trembled, her voice rang clear. I chose to keep him safe from you. And look how that worked out. Kelly laughed. He grew up without a mother anyway. At least if you died quickly, it would have been a tragedy instead of abandonment. He'd have mourned you instead of wondering why you didn't love him enough to stay. The words hit Iris like physical blows. She swayed, and Bruno moved quickly to steady her. Through the living room window, he saw Cross's van pull up the driveway, followed by 2 police cruisers. Kelly saw them too. Her expression shifted through several emotions. Surprise, resignation, and finally a strange sort of relief. I did it for us. Her voice turned soft, almost pleading, as she looked at Bruno. Everything I did was for us. You have to understand that. I love you. I was trying to give us the life we deserved. The front door burst open. Police officers entered with weapons-drawn voices, commanding Kelly to put her hands up. She complied slowly, still staring at Bruno with those desperate eyes. You'll see. She said it as they pulled her arms behind her back, metal cuffs clicking into place. Eventually you'll understand. We were meant to be together. They led her away, still talking, voice fading as they guided her out the front door and into a waiting cruiser. Cross entered, last tablet in hand, showing footage of everything that had just transpired. Got it all. His voice was grim. Her confession, the admission of attempted murder, all of it. She's done. Bruno nodded numbly. Beside him, Iris made a small sound, and he turned just in time to catch her as her legs gave out. She was hyperventilating, gasping for air that wouldn't come, eyes wide and unseeing. Panic attack. He'd seen enough of them over the past few days to recognize the signs. He lowered her gently to the couch, kept his voice calm and steady. Iris, breathe with me. In through your nose. Count to 4. She couldn't. Her whole body shook violently, tremors so intense she seemed to be vibrating. Bruno pulled out his phone and called Dr. Mitchell, explained the situation in terse sentences. The doctor promised to come immediately. Cross stood awkwardly in the doorway, clearly uncertain whether to leave or stay. Give me a minute, Bruno said without looking up. Cross nodded and retreated outside. It took 20 minutes for Iris to calm enough to speak. When she did, her voice was hoarse and broken. It was real. She stared at nothing. All of it. It was all real. Someone really did want to kill me. I know. Bruno kept hold of her hand, grounding her. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't see it. She wasn't trying to protect you. That's what she said. She did it because she wanted you. Because I was in the way. I spent 3 years on the streets because your assistant was obsessed with you. The enormity of it settled over them both. All that suffering, all that fear, all those lost years because of one woman's delusion. Because Bruno had been too blind to see the warning signs, too absorbed in his work to notice that the person handling his life was unraveling into dangerous obsession. Dr. Mitchell arrived and gave Iris a sedative, something to bring her down from the panic to help her sleep. She fought it at first, said she needed to stay alert, needed to be ready, but eventually her eyes grew heavy and she slipped under. Mitchell helped Bruno move her to the guest suite, got her settled in bed with the IV reattached to replace fluids she'd lost during the panic attack. In the hallway, Mitchell's face was grave. She's not going to be okay for a long time. This kind of trauma layered on top of everything she's already endured, she needs serious help. Intensive therapy, possibly inpatient treatment. She can stay here. Bruno's voice left no room for argument. Whatever she needs, I'll provide it. That might not be enough. Mitchell packed his bag. Sometimes the best help comes from professionals in controlled environments, places designed specifically for trauma recovery. We'll cross that bridge if we come to it. After the doctor left, Bruno stood in the quiet house feeling the weight of everything pressing down. Through the window, he watched the police cars drive away, taking Kelly to a jail cell where she'd await trial. Justice. They'd gotten justice. He'd done everything right, found the evidence, set the trap, made sure she confessed on camera. So why did it feel like losing Cross found him there 20 minutes later? The investigator looked as exhausted as Bruno felt. The DA's office is already filing charges. With the footage and her confession, this is going to be an easy prosecution. She'll go away for a long time. Good. For what it's worth, Cross shifted his weight. You did the right thing. Bringing her to justice protects your family, prevents her from hurting anyone else. Does it? Bruno's voice was hollow. Because my ex-wife is sedated in a guest room, traumatized all over again. My son is going to come home to a house full of police tape and questions. And I have to figure out how to explain that the woman who worked for me, who I trusted, who brought him cookies and asked about his day, tried to murder his mother. You couldn't have known, Cross said it gently. Obsession like that, it hides itself. Presence as dedication. By the time you see it for what it is, it's usually too late. It was 3 years too late. Bruno sent Cross away and spent the rest of the afternoon making calls. To his lawyer about restraining orders and trial preparation. To his mother asking her to keep Ethan another night because something had come up. To a therapist specializing in trauma booking an emergency consultation for tomorrow. The practical details of crisis management, each task a distraction from the larger horror still settling into his bones. Evening came. He checked on Iris every 30 minutes, found her sleeping, fitfully, occasionally crying out in dreams he couldn't reach. Around 7, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When he opened it, his blood ran cold. The message was from Kelly. Somehow she'd gotten access to a phone from the jail. The text was brief. I meant what I said. I did it for us. You'll forgive me eventually. We're meant to be together. I'll wait for you, however long it takes. Bruno blocked the number immediately and forwarded the message to Cross, to the DA's office, to everyone who needed to know that Kelly's obsession hadn't ended with her arrest. Then he turned off his phone and sat in the darkness of his living room, trying to understand how he'd been so blind. The signs had been there, Kelly volunteering to work late when he did. The way she'd seemed to know his schedule better than he knew it himself. How she'd become visibly tense whenever he mentioned Iris in those first months after the divorce. The small gifts, expensive coffee, his favorite Scotch tickets to events she knew he'd enjoy. He'd interpreted it all as exceptional dedication. Outstanding professional behavior. Never once had he considered it might be something darker. Upstairs, a door opened. Footsteps on the stairs, soft and uncertain. Iris appeared in the doorway wrapped in a blanket, hair tangled from sleep, eyes still foggy from the sedative. Couldn't stay down. Her voice was rough. Kept dreaming she was coming back. She's in jail. Bruno turned on a single lamp, keeping the light low. She can't hurt you anymore. Can't she? Beatrice moved into the room, carefully lowering herself onto the couch. She knew everything about your life, your security codes, where Ethan goes to school. Everything. What if she has friends on the outside? What if this isn't over? The same fears had been circling Bruno's mind. Cross is setting up additional security. Cameras at Ethan's school, extra patrols in the neighborhood. We're going to be vigilant. For how long? Iris pulled the blanket tighter. A month, a year, forever. When do we get to stop being afraid? Bruno had no answer. They sat in silence, broken only by the house settling the distant sound of traffic, the ordinary noises of a world that felt anything but ordinary. After a while, Iris spoke again. I need to leave. Her voice was flat, decided. Take Ethan somewhere far away. Change our names. Start over where she can't find us. No. Bruno's voice was firm. Running didn't work before. It won't work now. We stay. We rebuild. We prove that she didn't win. She already won. Iris met his eyes. She took 3 years of my life. 3 years of my son's childhood. She made me so afraid I forgot how to be human. That's winning. Then we take back what she stole. One day at a time. Starting tomorrow. Tomorrow. Iris laughed bitterly. Tomorrow I wake up and remember all over again that the nightmare was real. That I was right to be terrified. That someone really did want me dead, and for the stupidest, most senseless reason imaginable. She wanted you, so I had to disappear. My entire life destroyed because of someone else's delusion. Her voice broke on the last word. Tears started falling silent and endless, and Bruno moved to sit beside her. She collapsed against him, sobbing into his shoulder with the kind of grief that came from somewhere deep and primal. He held her while she shattered, offering presence in the absence of words that could fix this. Time passed. Iris's crying eventually subsided to occasional hitches in her breathing. She pulled back slightly, wiping her face with the edge of the blanket. I don't know how to do this. Her voice was small, lost. I don't know how to be here. How to be his mother. I missed everything important. Then we figure it out together. Bruno kept his voice steady. I don't have answers either. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we start from where we are instead of where we wish we were. Where we are is broken. Then we work with broken. We don't have to be fixed to move forward. Iris looked at him with those haunted green eyes that had seen too much darkness. What if I can't? What if the fear never goes away? Then we learn to live with it. Bruno said it simply, honestly. Fear doesn't have to win. It just has to be survivable. They sat together in the dim lamplight, two people held together by shared history and shared damage, trying to find footing in a world that had proven unsafe. Outside, night deepened. Somewhere in a jail cell, Kelly Mitchell sat convinced that love justified everything she'd done. And in this house, Bruno and Iris began the impossible work of believing that safety might be possible again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Ethan coming home to change circumstances. Therapy sessions, legal proceedings, the long road of recovery that would take months or years. But tonight they simply existed in the aftermath, damaged but present, afraid. But together, the storm had passed. Now came the harder work of learning how to rebuild in the wreckage it had left behind. The days that followed Kelly's arrest blurred together in a haze of police statements, legal consultations, and carefully controlled chaos. Bruno brought Ethan home to a house that felt different, charged with invisible tension the boy couldn't name but clearly sensed. His son became quieter, more watchful, asking questions Bruno didn't know how to answer. Why were there new cameras? Why did that lady get taken away by police? Why did Iris cry so much? Iris herself retreated into something that looked like survival, but felt closer to surrender. She attended her first therapy session 3 days after the confrontation, returning hollow-eyed and silent. Dr. Reyes, the trauma specialist Bruno had found, called afterward to warn him the road ahead would be measured in years, not months. PTSD didn't heal on convenient timelines. Recovery wasn't linear. There would be setbacks, relapses, moments where the progress they'd made seemed to evaporate overnight. She needs space to process. Dr. Reyes's voice had been gentle but firm. Pushing her toward normalcy too quickly will backfire. Let her set the pace, so Bruno gave her space. He moved her belongings from the main house guest suite to the smaller cottage at the edge of the property, a one-bedroom structure originally built for staff that had sat empty for months. Iris seemed to breathe easier, with walls between her and the family, with a door she could lock with distance that felt like safety, even if it was an illusion. The separation hurt more than Bruno wanted to admit. Having her close but untouchable, present but unreachable, felt like a special kind of torture. He'd catch glimpses of her walking the garden paths in the early morning, shoulders hunched against cold that seemed to come from inside her bones rather than the weather. She moved like someone still waiting for the next blow to fall. Ethan noticed. His 5-year-old brain couldn't articulate what he was sensing, but it manifested in small ways. Nightmares that had him calling for Bruno 3 times a night, reluctance to go to school, a new habit of checking windows and doors, obsessively mimicking security behaviors he'd watched the adults perform. The trauma was spreading, infecting everyone it touched. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Bruno maintained his work schedule as best he could while managing the household, coordinating with lawyers overseeing security upgrades. Kelly's arraignment happened without him. He sent his attorney to represent his interests, couldn't stomach seeing her face again. The news came back that she'd pleaded not guilty, was claiming temporary insanity, seemed to genuinely believe she'd done nothing wrong. The trial was set for 6 months out, 6 more months of waiting, of living in limbo, of wondering if justice would actually arrive. Iris's therapy continued 3 times weekly. She took her medications now, the anti-anxiety pills she'd refused before, though she complained they made her feel disconnected from reality. Better disconnected than drowning, Dr. Reyes had apparently said. Bruno only knew about these sessions secondhand through brief updates Iris would give when he brought her groceries or checked on her heating system. Their conversations stayed surface level, careful. Neither of them knew how to bridge the gap that had opened. Then one evening in late March, as Bruno was putting Ethan to bed, his son asked the question that had been building for weeks. "Why doesn't Iris eat dinner with us anymore?" Bruno paused, one hand on the light switch. "She's not feeling well. You know that. But she's been not feeling well for a really long time." Ethan's voice carried that particular kid logic that was harder to argue with than adult reasoning. "And you said eating with family helps people feel better. You always make me eat dinner even when I'm sad." The observation struck home. Bruno sat on the edge of the bed, buying time to formulate a response that was honest without being cruel. "Iris is dealing with some grown-up problems that are hard to fix. Sometimes people need space to heal. Does she not like us?" The question came out small, vulnerable. "No, buddy. She likes us very much. She's just scared right now." "Of what? Everything?" The truth slipped out before Bruno could filter it. "She's scared of everything, and that's a really hard way to live." Ethan processed this with the seriousness he applied to important matters. "Maybe we should invite her anyway. Even if she's scared. Sometimes when I'm scared of the dark, you sit with me until I'm not scared anymore. Maybe Iris needs someone to sit with her." The wisdom of children. Bruno felt something crack in his chest, some wall he'd built around his own fear and helplessness. "You're right. We should invite her." The next morning he walked to the cottage and knocked. Iris answered in sweatpants and an oversized sweater, hair pulled back, face bare. She looked marginally less gaunt than she had 3 weeks ago, but the shadows under her eyes remained. "Ethan wants you to have dinner with us." Bruno kept his voice neutral, giving her the option to refuse. "Tonight, in the main house," he asked specifically. Said it's important. Something flickered across Iris's face, fear, longing, uncertainty all tangled together. "I don't know if I'm ready." "You don't have to be ready. You just have to show up." She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "What time? 6?" Bruno left before she could change her mind. The day dragged toward evening with agonizing slowness. He checked in with security, reviewed the latest updates from his attorney about Kelly's case, tried and failed to focus on the acquisition deal his team was finalizing. At 5:30, he started cooking nothing fancy, just pasta with marinara sauce, garlic bread salad, comfort food. Ethan set the table with exaggerated care, placing 3 napkins, 3 forks, 3 glasses of water. At 6, exactly, a soft knock came at the back door. Iris stood on the threshold wearing a simple dress Bruno recognized from years ago, looking terrified but determined. Ethan ran to greet her, grabbing her hand and pulling her inside with the easy affection of a child who didn't understand complicated adult emotions. "I helped make the table pretty for you. See, it's beautiful." Iris's voice caught, but she smiled. "Thank you for inviting me." They sat around the dining table, the 3 of them, and for the first few minutes, awkwardness reigned. Ethan filled the silence with chatter about school, his new friend Marcus the hamster in their classroom who had babies. Normal kid things. Iris listened, actually smiled a few times, and Bruno felt something ease in his chest. Can you pass the bread? Iris asked, and Bruno did, and their fingers brushed briefly during the exchange. Neither pulled away immediately. Dinner stretched past an hour. Ethan asked if Iris wanted to see his room, and after a glance at Bruno for permission, she nodded. They disappeared upstairs, and Bruno heard his son's excited voice explaining his elaborate Lego city. 20 minutes later, they came back down, Iris's eyes red, but her expression softer than he'd seen in weeks. He's wonderful, she said it quietly, standing in the kitchen doorway. You've done such a good job with him. Bruno corrected, we made him. He's got your eyes, your smile, your kindness. That didn't come from me. I wasn't here. Iris's voice dropped. All the things that matter, the daily work of raising him, you did that alone. You did what you thought would keep him safe. Bruno set down the dish he'd been drying. That counts for something, does it? Or did I just traumatize him differently? Make him feel abandoned instead of threatened. Before Bruno could answer, Ethan reappeared wanting a bedtime story. He looked between the adults hopefully. Will you read to me, Iris? Both of you. They ended up in Ethan's room. One parent on each side of the bed taking turns reading pages from the Velveteen Rabbit. Ethan's head lolled against Iris's shoulder as sleep claimed him, and she froze, afraid to move and break the spell. Bruno helped ease their son down onto his pillow, pulled the covers up. They slipped out together, leaving the door cracked and the nightlight glowing. In the hallway, Iris leaned against the wall, eyes closed. Thank you for tonight, for letting me be part of his routine. He's your son. You don't need permission. Don't I? Iris looked at him directly for the first time all evening. I left. I gave up my rights. Just because the reasons were complicated doesn't change what I did. Then take them back. Bruno kept his voice steady. Have dinner with us, every night. Be his mother again. I don't know how. Neither did I when you left. I learned. You can too. They made it a routine after that. Dinner together most nights, then story time, gradually rebuilding the rhythm of family. Iris still retreated to the cottage afterward, still needed that separation, but the hours they spent together increased week by week. Bruno watched her with Ethan, saw how carefully she moved, how she savored every mundane moment as though it might be her last. She was learning to be a mother to a child who'd grown beyond her memory of him, and it was both beautiful and heartbreaking to witness. April arrived with unpredictable weather. Warm days that promised spring, then sudden storms that felt like winter's last gasp. On one of those storm days, Ethan was at a friend's house for a sleepover, and Bruno found himself alone in the mansion with Iris, who'd come for dinner and stayed to help clean up. Rain started around 8, gentle at first, then building to a downpour that hammered the windows with impressive force. They were in the living room when the first crack of thunder shook the house. Iris jumped violently, the coffee cup in her hand spilling across the table. She was on her feet instantly, backing toward the wall, and Bruno recognized the panic attack beginning before she did. It's just thunder. He kept his voice calm, approaching slowly. You're safe, you're here with me. But Iris wasn't hearing him. Her eyes had gone distant, unfocused, breath coming in sharp gasps. Another boom of thunder, and she flinched like she'd been struck. I can't do this. The words tumbled out frantic. I thought I could, but I can't. It's too much. It's all too much. She turned and ran. Bruno went after her without thinking, grabbing his jacket from the hook but not bothering to put it on. Iris was already out the front door by the time he cleared the foyer, disappearing into the storm, with no coat, no shoes, just blind animal panic driving her into the night. Rain hit him like a wall, instantly soaking through his clothes. He could barely see through the downpour, but he caught movement near the fountain, a dark shape stumbling through the darkness. He ran, shoes slipping on wet grass, and caught up as Iris reached the gate that led to the street. Iris, stop! She spun on him, and the look in her eyes was pure terror. Let me go. I have to go. I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to hurt Ethan. Everything I touch turns toxic. That's not true. Bruno gripped her shoulders, solid and real through the rain. Look at me. That's not true. Yes, it is. Tears mixed with rainwater on her face. I left him. I abandoned my baby. What kind of mother does that? What kind of person chooses to suffer on the streets instead of fighting to stay with her child? A terrified one. Bruno had to shout over the storm. A person who thought she was protecting the people she loved. You made the wrong choice, but you made it out of love. It doesn't matter. The damage is done. He's going to grow up knowing I wasn't there, knowing I chose to leave. You don't have to fix it alone." Bruno pulled her closer, making her focus on his face. "You never did. That was the mistake we both made. You thought you had to handle everything yourself, and I was too blind to see you were drowning." Iris's hands clutched at his jacket, fingers desperate for something to hold on to. "I'm so tired, Bruno. I'm so tired of being afraid, of feeling broken, of waking up every day and having to remember all over again that the nightmare was real." "Then stop trying to be normal." Bruno's voice was fierce. "Normal is overrated. Just try to be here. Present. That's enough." "Is it?" Iris searched his face. "Is being a mess enough? For me it is. Always has been." They stood in the rain, both drenched and shaking, the storm raging around them. Thunder rolled overhead, but Iris didn't flinch this time. She was too focused on Bruno's face, on the truth she saw written there. "I never stopped loving you." The confession fell from her lips like something she'd been holding back too long. "Through everything, through all the fear and the pain and the years of running, I never stopped. I never stopped either." Bruno admitted what he'd been denying for 3 years. "I tried. God knows I tried. But I couldn't. You're woven into every part of me." "What do we do now?" "We start over. Not where we were. Where we are. Two broken people who love each other, trying to figure out how to be a family again." Iris touched his face with trembling fingers, tracing the lines that 3 years had carved there. "I don't know if I can be what you need. You're already what I need. You're here. You're trying. That's everything." He kissed her, then soft and careful, like something precious he'd thought lost forever. She kissed him back with years of longing and regret and hope, all tangled together. The rain pounded them both, cold and relentless, but neither pulled away. They stood in the storm, holding each other, finding solid ground in a world that had proven itself capable of infinite cruelty. When they finally went back inside, soaking wet and exhausted, they found the house empty and quiet. Bruno brought towels, started a fire in the living room fireplace. They sat wrapped in blankets while their clothes dried, not talking much, just existing together in a way they hadn't been able to since everything fell apart. "Move back into the main house." Bruno said it quietly, afraid to push, but knowing it needed to be said. "Take the room down the hall from mine. Not the guest suite. A real room. Your room." "Bruno," Iris's voice held warning and wanting both. "I'm not asking you to share mine. Not yet." He held up a hand. "I'm just asking you to be close. To stop hiding in the cottage like you're waiting to be sent away. What if I'm not ready? Then you're not ready. But you don't have to be alone while you figure it out." Iris stared into the fire flames reflected in her eyes. After a long silence, she nodded. "Okay, I'll move back." The transition happened gradually over the next week. Iris brought her few belongings from the cottage, claimed the bedroom Bruno had prepared, decorated, simply nothing overwhelming, just a safe space that was hers. She still startled at unexpected sounds, still had nightmares that woke her gasping, but being closer seemed to help. When the panic attacks came at 3 a.m., Bruno was just down the hall instead of across the property. They built a new normal from the ruins of the old one. Family dinners every night, homework help for Ethan, grocery shopping together on Saturdays. Therapy sessions that Bruno started attending with her when Dr. Reyes suggested couples counseling might accelerate healing. They learned to communicate again, to express needs without accusations, to navigate triggers and boundaries with care. Summer arrived. Kelly's trial was postponed, twice pushed into autumn, by legal maneuvering that Bruno's attorney said was standard but felt like torture. The waiting gnawed at them both. But life couldn't pause indefinitely for justice to arrive, so they kept moving forward. One evening in June, Bruno took Iris and Ethan to the park. It was golden hour, the lights soft and warm, families scattered across the grass, flying kites and throwing frisbees. Ethan ran ahead to the playground, all energy and joy. Bruno stopped by a bench overlooking the lake, turning to Iris. "I have something to ask you." He pulled a small box from his pocket. Iris's eyes went wide. "I'm not asking you to marry me." Bruno opened the box to reveal a simple silver band. Nothing like the elaborate diamond he'd given her 7 years ago. "Not yet. You're not ready, and honestly, neither am I. But I want you to have this as a promise that I choose you. Today, tomorrow, every day after. no matter how hard it gets. Iris's eyes filled with tears. You don't have to answer now. Take your time. Yes, the word interrupted him, fierce and certain. Yes, I choose you too, every day. Bruno slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly and pulled her close. Across the park, Ethan waved from the top of the slide, completely unaware that his parents had just promised themselves to each other again. They waved back, and Iris leaned into Bruno's shoulder, and for the first time in longer than either could remember, the future felt like something other than threat. 3 months later, they did get married. The ceremony was small, intimate, held in their garden on a September afternoon when the leaves were just beginning to turn. 20 guests, no elaborate production, just two people promising to choose each other through the messy, complicated reality of life. Bruno's mother attended, tears streaming down her face as she apologized to Iris for years of coldness and judgment. Ethan served as ring bearer, beaming with pride, still not entirely clear on what was happening, but thrilled to be part of it. Dr. Reyes came, and Richard Cross and a handful of friends who'd stood by them through the worst. The vows were simple. No grand gestures or flowery language. Just honest promises to show up, to stay present, to work through the damage together. When the officiant pronounced them married, Ethan cheered louder than anyone, and laughter rippled through the small gathering. It felt right, real, built on truth instead of fantasy. After the ceremony, while guests mingled over champagne and hors d'oeuvre, Bruno found Iris standing alone by the fountain. She held an envelope unopened, her expression unreadable. What's that? Came in the mail this morning. Iris turned it over, showing him the return address. From Kelly, from the jail. Bruno's stomach clenched. Do you want me to throw it away? No, Iris's voice was steady. I think I need to read it. Not for her, for me. She opened the envelope, carefully unfolded a single page of neat handwriting. Bruno watched her face as she read, saw emotion shift, anger, sadness, something that might have been pity. When she finished, she handed it to him without comment. The letter was brief, Iris. I'm writing this from a place that has given me time to think. Too much time, maybe. My lawyer says I'll be here for at least 10 years, possibly more. That's what attempted murder gets you, apparently, even when you were just trying to fix things. I want to say I'm sorry, but I'm not sure that's true. I'm sorry you suffered. I'm sorry for what I put you through. But I'm not sorry for loving Bruno, for seeing what you two could have been if you'd just stepped aside. Maybe that makes me a monster. The therapist they make me see certainly thinks so. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I see now what I couldn't see. Then love isn't supposed to hurt other people. It took losing everything to understand that. I hope you find peace. I hope Bruno finds happiness. I hope your son never learns what his parents' assistant did to his mother. Some stories are better left untold. Kelly. Bruno folded the letter, handed it back. How do you feel? Iris was quiet for a long moment, staring at the fountain's rippling water. Sad. Not for her, she made her choices, but sad that it happened at all. That obsession can twist someone so completely they think attempted murder is reasonable. That's not love. That's sickness. Are you going to respond eventually? Not because she deserves it, but because I need to let go of the anger. Carrying it around is exhausting. She tucked the letter into her purse and turned back toward the gathering. Through the crowd, Ethan was showing his grandmother his bow tie, chattering about cake. The scene was so normal, so beautifully mundane that it momentarily stole Bruno's breath. Later that night, after guests departed and Ethan collapsed into bed exhausted from excitement, Bruno and Iris sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies drift across the darkened garden. The ring on Iris's finger caught starlight. Tell me the truth. Iris's voice was soft. Are we going to be okay? I don't know. Bruno was done with false reassurances. We're both damaged. We've got years of therapy ahead. There'll be setbacks, bad days, moments where the past crashes back and it feels impossible to move forward. That's not very reassuring, but we're doing it together. That counts for something. Maybe everything. They rocked gently, the swing creaking its familiar rhythm. Inside, the house was quiet. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Kelly's trial in 2 weeks, Ethan starting first grade, the constant work of healing. But tonight they were simply here. Married, together, choosing each other despite knowing exactly how broken they both were. Love isn't the absence of cracks. The thought settled over Bruno with the weight of truth. Love is choosing to hold the pieces together even after they've shattered. It's showing up day after day. It's forgiving the unforgivable. It's believing that broken things, when mended with care, can be stronger than they were before. Beside him, Iris seemed to sense his thoughts. She took his hand, threading their fingers together. Sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones that had to fall apart before they could truly begin. Her voice carried a hard-won wisdom. We lost years. We suffered. But look what we built from the rubble. Ethan appeared at the screen door, sleepy and confused. I can't find my stuffed bear. They went inside together, the three of them, to search for the missing toy, found it wedged between the headboard and wall. Ethan clutched it tight, already drifting back to sleep. Iris stroked his hair, and Bruni watched them both, his son, his wife, his family, and felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for years. Tomorrow the sun would rise. Life would continue with all its complications. But tonight they'd survived. They'd chosen each other. They'd built something real from ashes and terror and loss. That was enough. Maybe it was everything.